September 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. The morning humidity clung to the tin roofs of the operations huts as Imperial Japanese naval aviators gathered for briefing. Through the open flaps, sleek A6M Zeros gleamed in pale sunlight, their engines ticking softly like predators waiting to run. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, already scarred and half-blind from combat over Guadalcanal, scanned the latest intelligence report dropped from Tokyo. He laughed aloud and tossed the sheet onto the table. "The Americans," he said, "are trying again. A new carrier fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. It weighs twice a Zero, typical Yankee stupidity." His comrades joined the laughter. For 2 years, the Zero had reigned as Emperor of the Pacific Air War. It had cut through the Allies' Buffaloes, Hurricanes, and P-40 Warhawks like a blade through paper. Its astonishing turn radius and range had made it seem almost divine. To face it in 1942 was to die within seconds. So when rumors spread that the Americans had built a larger, slower replacement for the Wildcat, Japanese confidence rebounded. The Zero, after all, defined everything they believed about air combat: agility, speed, and the warrior spirit. The future seemed secure, but war was about to change because technology was about to replace ideology. 3,000 miles away, inside Grumman's Bethpage factory on Long Island, rows of new machines took shape around the skeleton of the F6F Hellcat. Bearing the mark of chief designer William Schwendler and test pilot Corky Meyer, the Hellcat was everything the Zero was not: thick-skinned, heavily armored, and powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp. It could climb like a cat on fire and dive harder than gravity itself could follow. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns armed each wing, 3 per side, firing nearly 70 rounds per second. Japanese intelligence dismissed those figures as fabrication. They had no idea that in 30 months America would produce 12 275 of these machines, while Japan struggled to build 6,000 Zeros. By October 1943, the first Hellcats arrived aboard USS Yorktown in Essex. Their pilots were younger than many of the Zero's engineers. They had trained under a system so relentless that a pilot could log 700 flight hours before combat. His Japanese opponent by then received barely 40. The difference was not merely experience, it was philosophy. The United States treated aviators as industrial assets. Japan saw them as spiritual weapons. One approach built legions, the other legends. Saburo Sakai would remember his first encounter for the rest of his life. It came over the Philippine Sea in June 1944, weeks before the Battle of the Marianas began. He spotted newly launched American fighters climbing from flat-tops below. Too big, too blue, too slow, he thought. He dived to engage. The lead Hellcat banked hard to port, then rose vertical, a move no Wildcat could have made. Its engine roared with raw metallic fury. Within seconds, the tracer stream crossed Sakai's cowling. Only fate and an American drop tank that hadn't released saved him that day. He landed shaking, admitting to his squadron, "This is no Wildcat. This is something else." The war had shifted. Within 12 months, the Hellcat would write its legacy in flame. It achieved a kill ratio of 19-1 across the Pacific theater. At the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, 346 Japanese planes fell in a single day to just 30 American losses, most of them Hellcats. The Zero that once danced on air was now a specter, its paper-thin frame and missing armor making every hit fatal. As fuel shortages worsened, Japan's training programs collapsed entirely. Veterans died faster than replacements could learn to take off. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa later confessed, "We laughed at the Hellcat because we did not understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war." Saburo Sakai echoed him decades later. The Zero made Japan a power of skill. The Hellcat made Japan understand that skill cannot compete with progress. In 50 missions, the new American fighter erased 20 years of imperial superiority built on romance and discipline, replacing it with math and manufacture. By early 1944, the Pacific sky was a theater divided by belief and reality. Japan's Imperial Navy still clung to the religion of the Zero. The fighter's grace remained an article of faith. Its pilots believed a lighter plane with nimble hands would always outfly power. The Hellcat, wide-bodied, barreled, and heavily armored, was to them a flying contradiction. Over the Philippine Sea that spring, those beliefs met their extinction. From the decks of the Yorktown, Essex, and Bunker Hill rose a wave of naval aviation reimagined. Hundreds of F6F3s and F6F5s snarling from catapults in perfect rhythm. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines roared so loud they drowned the sea itself. Silver gun ports lined each wing, 6 50 caliber Brownings, 3 per side, locked to fire in harmonized cones of lead. Where the Zero pounced with a knife's edge, the Hellcat brought an avalanche. Performance data proved the architects right. At sea level, the Hellcat reached 340 miles per hour. At 20,000 feet, nearly 390 miles per hour. The A6M30 barely crossed 350 miles per hour and climbed slightly faster below 10,000 feet. Above that, its float-carbureted engine starved on turns. The Hellcat, armed with fuel injection, could snap roll into steep dives and rise out unpunished. A veteran Japanese ace who tried to outrun one in a dive called it like being chased by fate itself. Armor made the difference between warriors and survivors. The Zero's thin skin and unprotected fuel tanks turned hits into bonfires. Hellcat pilots returned home with holes through wings, oil leaking from engines, canopies cracked but alive. Out of 19 enemy planes destroyed, 1 Hellcat fell, a kill ratio of 19:1. U.S. naval records credit the type with 5,071 enemy kills for 270 combat losses. Training widened that margin. Every American pilot rehearsed defensive spirals, thock weaves, and team gunnery, the tactical antithesis of Japan's individual showmanship. Squadrons fought as machines of men, linked by radio discipline and shared seconds of decision. Meanwhile, Japan's aviation schools were ghosts of their former selves, starved of fuel and cadres. Young flyers learned in classrooms where models replaced aircraft, then went straight to carriers without ever firing a gun. The Hellcat's shape embodied American industrial logic. Everything granted forgiveness. Its thick wings made carrier landings almost foolproof. Its engine could take combat damage and still drag the pilot 500 miles to safety. The Zero, built to win a dogfight, was never built to survive a war. By 1944, that truth was written in smoke trails over the Marianas. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19 to 20, 1944, carrier decks swarmed with Hellcats as radar operators called incoming bandits. Waves of Zeros rose from Japan's first-line carriers, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Hio. One observer on the Yorktown claimed the sky looked like black insects against a blue wall. The Hellcats climbed through them with mathematical precision, their guns turning dogfights into calculations of energy and radius. Within a day, 300 enemy planes were gone. American pilots returned so numerous that some had to circle until decks cleared for landing. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell shot down 7 planes in one mission, then another 9 over the Philippine Sea. He called his Hellcat a gentleman's machine. She'll take care of you if you treat her right. Japanese survivors, watching burning carriers turn to oily black pillars, spoke later of despair. One after another, our fighters fell flaming. The enemy's plane could spin and climb like a bird made of iron, recalled Ensign Keniyoshi Muto, a former Zero pilot. The Hellcat chose how we died. After the battle, Sakai was sent home to instruct cadets. His words were strangely gentle. The Hellcat taught me humility. It was not better because its pilots were superior. It was better because their nation built every part to outlast ours. By mid-1944, the laughter had gone silent. What the Japanese had dismissed as a clumsy iron brute now ruled their war-zone skies. Flight tests from Rabaul to Leyte confirmed what no pilot dared say aloud. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, had met its evolutionary dead end. The contrast between the two machines was now a matter of survival statistics. In energy combat, the Hellcat always entered with initiative. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 delivered 2,000 horsepower, letting the F6F5 climb to 37,000 feet and dive safely past 400 miles per hour. The Zero could barely follow beyond 350. Push it faster, and its wings screamed under strain. Even in low-altitude climb, its one enduring edge, evaporation coolers failed in tropical heat. Pilots who once preached spiritual dominance now prayed for mechanical parity. The Empire's training schools, burned by attrition and blockade, produced green men flying skeletal machines. Their redundancy was ritual. their deaths statistical. The Americans, by contrast, arrived with methods. A Hellcat pilot understood his aircraft like a formula: maximum turn speed at 220 knots, roll rate equals 80 degrees per second, dive recovery equals automatic at full throttle. Each engagement was science made lethal. On paper, the Zero and Hellcat were close. At 20,000 feet, the Hellcat's top speed, 389 miles per hour, surpassed the A6M3's 352. The Japanese fighter still turned tighter, but bled altitude and energy with every spiral. In protracted combat, that meant death by entropy. The heavier F6F simply stayed above, biding its time. The duel was no longer a dance, but a dissection. In cockpit evaluations after raids, captured Japanese flyers admitted their shock. Commander Kaneyoshi Muto recalled his first Hellcat kill attempt. I fired at him from the side. Sparks, nothing. He turned toward me. I saw bullets walking across my wing. I rolled away and he followed. How could such a heavy machine move so fast? The Zero's 20mm Type 99s shattered spars with elegance, but carried only 125 rounds per gun. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2s hurled 13 seconds of continuous fire. An A6M's skin-thin fuselage could not endure a single second of that storm. By September 1944, U.S. fleet logbooks showed Hellcats claiming 4,947 enemy aircraft for losses under 300. These were not numbers of heroism, they were proof of physics. The carrier war had transformed into arithmetic: horsepower, armor, training, industry. Japan possessed none of these in quantity. The cultural shock within the Imperial Navy Aviation Bureau was profound. Officers had taught that the fighter was an extension of the soul, requiring speed through lightness and precision through sacrifice. Grumman's engineers had taught the opposite, that a pilot is only as lethal as the machine that forgives his mistakes. The Hellcat forgave everything. In one post-war debriefing, Japanese ace Saburo Sakai conceded, "Those pilots did not fight as men of spirit. They fought as machines of will, and their machines had more will than ours." He knew the truth by then. Skill was finite, production was not. Japan had entered World War II with wisdom from 1920. America entered with factories from 1940. By the time the Kamimura Air Group formed for defense of the home islands, Hellcat raids had become constant. The A6M5 attempted heavier armor and thicker skin, but each upgrade erased what made the Zero unique: its nimbleness. Added weight reduced climb and range. The ghostly hunter of Pearl Harbor had become a wheezy defensive tool, an old samurai asked to stop a machine gun bullet with a katana. Battle reports from Formosa and the Philippines tell the same story in different words. Hellcats approaching head-on at a speed that compressed time. Zeros rolled, climbed, stalled, tracer lines intersected like geometry lessons, and the sky fell silent. By 1945, most American carrier kills against Japanese fighters belonged to Hellcats alone. The fighters that Tokyo once dismissed as lumbering had become symbols of inevitability. Grumman's men called their plane the Ace Maker. To the Japanese who faced it, it was death-given engines. By the summer of 1945, the Hellcat's dominance was absolute. From the Marianas to Okinawa, the familiar roar of double Wasp engines announced the end of Japan's aerial resistance. The fighter that Tokyo's officers had once mocked as heavy, clumsy, and crude had become their nemesis, a mechanical force that turned the sky itself into American territory. Final statistics tell the story in numbers that defy disbelief. U.S. Navy and Marine F6F pilots flew 66,530 combat sorties and claimed 5,163 kills, 56% of all U.S. Navy Marine air victories of the war. The overall kill-to-loss ratio stood at 19:1. Against the Zero specifically, the Hellcat achieved 13:1, a mathematical expression of technological evolution. Against newer Japanese fighters like the Ki-84 Hayate, it was 9.51. Even the heavily armed J-2M Raiden fell at 3.7-1 odds. These were not victories of chance, but of design philosophy made manifest. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's all-time leading ace, scored all 34 of his victories flying Hellcats. His assessment was simple and devastating. It was an outstanding fighter plane. It performed well, was easy to fly, and was a stable gun platform. But what I really remember most was that it was rugged and easy to maintain. The Hellcat had transformed aerial warfare from an art into an industry. The final air battles over Japan told the same story with tragic clarity. On August 15, 1945, as Emperor Hirohito announced surrender, 4 Hellcats from VF-88 encountered a mixed formation of Zeros and J-2M Jacks over Atsugi Airfield, the last major dogfight of World War II. Even as peace was being declared, the mechanical superiority that had defined the Pacific War's final years played out one last time. The American fighters, built for forgiveness and endurance, returned home. Most of their Japanese opponents did not. By war's end, 12,275 Hellcats had rolled from Grumman's Bethpage factory, a production miracle that dwarfed Japan's entire wartime aircraft output. Each machine represented not just engineering excellence, but industrial commitment. Redundant systems, pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, 6 reliable guns. Where Japanese fighters were built to win perfect duels, Hellcats were built to survive imperfect wars. The human cost of this technological mismatch was profound. Japan entered the Pacific War with the finest naval aviators in the world, men like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Tetsuzo Iwamoto, whose skill bordered on supernatural. By 1945, most were dead or grounded, victims not of inferior courage but of industrial mathematics. Their replacements, teenagers with minimal training flying worn-out machines, faced an enemy that grew stronger with each passing month. In post-war interviews, surviving Japanese pilots spoke with remarkable candor about their shock. "We thought fighting spirit could overcome metal," admitted former Zero ace Kaneyoshi Muto. "The Hellcat taught us that metal, properly applied, becomes fighting spirit." It was a lesson learned too late, that wars of attrition belong to those who can replace losses faster than they suffer them. Saburo Sakai, who lived to see both the Zero's triumph and its eclipse, offered perhaps the most poignant reflection. "Our fighters were like swords, beautiful, deadly, personal. Theirs were like rifles, crude, reliable, numerous. In 1942, swords seemed sufficient. By 1945, we understood that rifles win wars." The Hellcat's legacy extended far beyond its 19:1 kill ratio. It proved that democratic engineering, designed by committee, built by assembly line, flown by masses of adequately trained pilots, could defeat aristocratic perfection. The Zero represented Japan's highest ideals: elegance, precision, the harmony of man and machine. The Hellcat represented America's pragmatism, redundancy, the triumph of good enough produced in overwhelming quantities. Today, fewer than a dozen Hellcats remain airworthy, their double Wasp engines still capable of that distinctive roar that once announced liberation to prisoners across the Pacific. Each takeoff carries forward a lesson written in aluminum and painted in victory, that laughing at your enemy's apparent weaknesses may blind you to their hidden strengths. The silence that followed was not peace, only the sound of history turning its page.